Is France broken, and is it broke? Marine Le Pen to join the left and bring down a minority government that was scrambling to stop a spiraling budget deficit. What's the plan for the far-right leader of Parliament's largest opposition party, and for the rest of those who oppose the minority government? We'll ask about a crisis that's been brewing ever since Emmanuel Macron's surprise call of snap elections, which backfired last July, a hung parliament that constitutionally cannot be dissolved again until next summer. With next year's budget yet to be approved, there won't be a US-style shutdown, but it's anyone's guess how a caretaker government limps along with a spiraling deficit. Yes, the hangover from tax breaks and COVID-era subsidies has France borrowing at a higher cost than Greece for a brief moment earlier in the day, and with an opposition that wants no part of belt-tightening, and neighboring Germany also in political and economic turmoil. The euro is falling, and it's all of the continent that just might have a problem. Today in the France 24 debate, Le Pen and the left are set to topple the Barnier government. With us, Eleonore Carrois, member of the French Parliament from Emmanuel Macron's Renaissance Party. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Socialist Paris Municipal Councillor Boris Fournier.
Happy to be here.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
Good to see journalist Gérald Olivier, also research fellow at the IPSE think tank.
IPSE, yeah. IPSE in French.
IPSE in French.
Institut Prospective et Sécurité en Europe.
Okay.
Institute of Prospective and Security in Europe.
Thank you for
inviting me.
Francesco Saracino is professor of macroeconomics at Sciences Po Paris. Good to see you as well. By the way, you can catch the show on the go. You can listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yes, the Prime Minister's pulled the trigger. Michel Barnier invoking Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, turning the 2025 spending bill on Social Security into a decree, thus exposing his government to a vote of no confidence. The veteran conservative had made a final concession to the far right by scrapping subsidy cuts for over-the-counter medicines, but it wasn't enough.
You hear, I know, in your constituencies, French people who want and expect stability and a clear picture for their businesses and daily life. Particularly at a time when, and I know what I'm talking about, our country has to defend its interests in Europe and across the world. This is why, on the basis of Article 49.3, I have decided to commit my government to pushing through legislation for the social security budget for 2025.
Nous avons toujours dit et considéré que punir les Français.
We have always said that it is unacceptable to punish the French for what their leaders did.
Mais dont leurs dirigeants étaient responsables n'était pas admissible. Ça veut dire que
That is why we're lodging a motion of no confidence against the government.
déposer une motion de censure.
What was it like, Eleonore Carrois, at the National Assembly? We've seen a lot of drama ever since this new parliament's come about. How would you characterize this Monday?
Well, it was a difficult Monday because obviously the decision to trigger Article 49.3 and the censorship that will most likely come in a few days.
On Wednesday.
Creates a lot of uncertainty and questioning about what will happen next. And there is one thing that strikes me is that the left and the far right will vote together to censor the government, but without proposing an alternative. And this has been the case for months already. We know that this has to be a compromised budget. We know that every single party will not have all of their desires, all of their policies transfixed in this budget, but ultimately, we need to have a budget. So a lot of uncertainty and questioning about what will happen next.
Boris Fournier, do you agree with that there hasn't been counter proposals?
I do not agree with Eleanor. I'm sorry, because who created this uncertainty is President Macron by calling the snap election, as you mentioned, in July. We had no idea what we were getting ourselves into, and the reality of the story is that
we got ourselves into a mess. And let me ask you a question, Francois. Is France a democracy? It is, right? Well, in what country that is a democracy, the person who comes in fourth in an election, which happened with the Conservative Party, embodied by Mr. Barnier, becomes the prime minister? That's literally what happened. The Conservatives came in fourth, and disregarding the historical precedents of the Fifth Republic, President Macron appointed a conservative as prime minister, disregarding the fact that the French people had voted for the left, who came in first in the snap election.
Can I respond? Because obviously we've heard this over and over again, and I understand you came first and you don't have a majority. You're 100 seats far from a majority, so you're really far from anywhere close to a majority.
Granted.
But you came in first, and you wanted to be to have a prime minister. But this is old story. What happens next is, what do we deal with our country? What budget will we have? How will what will the pensions be? What would the tax be in a year? And right now, am I happy with every single line in that budget? Obviously not. Is my party, the party where I come from, which is obviously not the party of the prime minister, deciding what the budget will look like? Obviously
No,
not.
the far right
but
is,
we do
because
well,
that-
actually, because the socialists didn't want to take part in it. If you would take part into this coalition, and if it were a real coalition as in other European countries, then we wouldn't have the far right deciding what's right and what's wrong. And ultimately, what we see is that the far right doesn't have a spine. That what they do is that they're going to censor anyways, because when you look at what they ask for and what there is in the budget, they'll censor anyway. So I really think it's a lack of responsibility from the left that takes us to this position.
Gérald Olivier, it was kind of vague what we heard, that clip from Marine Le Pen. She said you don't want to punish the French for what their leaders did. What is she referring to exactly?
That I'm not sure. But clearly the problem with France today is that whoever claims to have won those snap elections does not have a majority. And the fact is the left claimed to have come first. Technically it didn't. It was a union of three different leftist parties that all together came ahead of the National Front, or National Rally, as we call it. The party that got the most vote on the first round of election was the National Rally. And the fact that the government could involve the National Rally seems to me only justified. The problem is no one is willing to work with them. So Macron found a way to work without them, but not totally against them, until time comes to vote a budget with which they disagree, which is where we are today.
Is there any scenario under which there could have been some kind of moment of national unity where everyone could have held their nose to get a budget passed, or are the French just allergic to coalitions the likes you see in other countries?
At the moment they are. And I think that the ultimate issue is the person responsible for this mess, not the mess of France, but the mess of the last 6 months, is President Macron. And if on Wednesday the government falls and he has to find a new prime minister, he's going to find himself in an impossible situation of either claiming all power. There's an article in the Constitution, Article 16, that would allow him to govern without parliament. Or he takes account what just happened and he resigns. And if he resigns, we can have new elections, both for president and for the assembly.
You really think he's going to resign?
No, I don't, but he could.
Okay. Francesca Saracino, the euro is down. The bond yields are up for France. Cost of borrowing is increasing. Markets are worried, but they're not panicked. Should they be panicked?
No, I don't think so. I think there is today an economy which is in far worse position than the French economy in Europe, and this is the German economy. So where our worry should be as economists is more on the German economy. I think markets are acting, for once, quite rationally. They are, of course, putting some weight on the political instability. So the spreads have gone up, the interest rates have gone up, but not much so, actually, since July. I mean, we just saw in the past 5 minutes, well, the discussion here. I mean, France has been a total mess since the decision to call for the snap elections, politically speaking. But the French economy is doing fine. Not great, but fine, especially compared to the other European economies. So the problem that France has from an economic point of view is that it kind of...
And you
needs-
don't sense, by the way, this a sense of panic if you're in the
No,
streets
no,
of Paris.
because there is no reason to. Okay, so there is a big European problem of which France is a large chunk, which is, I mean, Europe needs to decide what they want to be as grown-ups. Okay, so we have China and the United States that are running ahead of us in terms of innovation, in terms of ecological transition, investment, you name it. And Europe is still deciding, should we have a new Green Deal? Should we change the Green Deal? Should we put some money? Should we take some money from welfare and put it on innovation, on defense? So we're still trying to find minor solutions to major problems. But that is a European problem. It's not a French problem. I mean, if I were in Germany, I would be much more worried for the economic situation because the German economic situation is much more serious because Germany has today, let's say, an economic structure which is very much out of sync with the current times.
And the,
I mean,
the most likely scenario, which is rolling over this year's budget, which already is got a lot of red ink in it in terms of, because we share a currency with...
but that is also something we should relativize. Of course, I mean, nobody would argue that running forever 6% deficit is normal. Nobody should argue that you should increase debt always in every situation. But still, today, as of today, the French public finances are not in a situation of disarray. Okay, so there is a lot of time. There is time to put the house in order, and while at the same time focusing on other priorities. One thing as a foreigner, I mean, I've been living in France for 20 years, but I still consider myself a foreigner. One thing that struck me in the past 6 months, the only and one issue we have been discussing has been the budget. No more discussion on industrial policy, no more discussion on what to do for China and the United States, no more discussion on where to put the money, the investment that is needed for the ecological transition. That completely disappeared from the political landscape of France. Now, let me ask you, is a 6% deficit a more important challenge than the fact that 95% of imports of solar panels as of today come from China? For me, no. For me, the real priority should be how to fight, it's a strong word, how to engage our competitors in the industrial transition, in the ecological transition. That should be the real priority. That disappeared for the past 6 months from the French political debate.
I have to agree with you, but actually we do discuss about these issues, but the one thing that everyone is focused on is the budget. And the past 6 months, if you look at what has happened, after the snap election, there was a long period of forming the government, and then they were right into the budgetary discussion. And the reason why it's so important to have a budget, be it not a perfect budget, but a budget nonetheless, is because all the measures that we've been discussing for agriculture, for strengthening the justice and police system, responding to the people's priorities, which we've heard during the European elections and then again during the snap elections, need to be budgetized somehow. And agreed, not perfect, but we need a budget that is different from the budget we had last year. I think we can agree on that.
But was cutting pensions for retirees a priority for the French people in the last election? Was cutting budget for a public hospital
But that's not what you have in this budget that has been presented.
Well,
that's not what you have in the budget that was shown.
Cutting budget for local government with a 5 billion slash that Michel Barnier wanted initially in this budget?
Well, but it wasn't in the copy that we saw.
I feel like what you see in this budget are not priorities that were expressed by the French people when elections happened.
What Michel Barnier tried to do, and I would agree that it wasn't perfect again, was to discuss with every single group to see what their priorities are, as you would do in a coalition. And what struck me, and again, is not against you or against your party, but what struck me is that there were parties, a coalition named the NFP, that said from the beginning, from the outset, no matter what you say, no matter what you propose, we're not going to take part in this discussion because the Prime Minister comes from the right and he's not legitimate. I can hear that, but I think it's not responsible honestly.
To be honest, though, Olivier Faure, the head of the Parti Socialiste, wrote to the Prime Minister just
He did
a
yesterday.
couple of days ago.
Yesterday.
Yeah, with
But
a list
that's
of
a bit
demands.
late, isn't it?
And they had a number of meetings, of
didn't.
interviews. Yes, they did.
They were
actually did.
invited and they decided not to participate.
Boris Vallaud did talk to the Prime Minister just a few days
They
ago.
were even invited to be part of the government, and you said, no, we don't want to take part in this. And I think that's not responsible.
All right, so markets worried but not spooked by the gridlock in Parliament. Striking taxi drivers in the south of France this Monday. They're spooked. They're more worried about a reduction in a government subsidy that allows them to ferry certain patients to and from hospital.
The social security bill they want to pass is going to harm us, and a lot of us are going to end up out of business.
So a carve-out demanded by those taxi drivers near Carpentras in the south of France. Gérald Olivier, there's two ways of looking at that clip if you're abroad. On the one hand, it's in Paris, have they forgotten the little guy? And the other way of looking at it is to say, well, the French don't want to pay the piper after so long getting state help.
Yeah, if it was just one handout. We have one corporation here, but there's actually hundreds technically. And the real problem behind the budget, and you're discussing very technical aspects, but at some point, even if the debt is not as bad as some people think it is, at some point that's what you have to look at. You have to look at government expenses and government revenues. And France is a country where people have been taxed to death for certain decades after decades after decades. And at some point, the little people, the people who pay the taxes, even though they get some money back in return, they end up with a lot less than they used to have, which is the real problem that France is having. And that's why what we've seen in the elections has been a drive of the extremes. Macron exploded the system back in 2017, and all the major parties found themselves in shambles. But what came to replace them was the LFI, the radical left on one end, and the National Rally on the other end, on the far right of the spectrum. Nobody will work with them. And from that point on, you have an ungovernable country, which is where we are now.
But is it ungovernable? Because with decrees, with rolling over the budget, the president has a lot of power.
Yes, he has, and he might actually manage to govern without a parliament, which is basically what we've had.
That's what he wants, anyways.
This is not the first time that the government has used that 49.3 article to pass through its politics without a vote. And in
all governments do that in France.
Well, they didn't used to. I'm old enough to know a time when there was actual vote in the National Assembly.
And what's surprising, though, is that for the first time, a CMP, a Commission Mixte Paritaire, the text that comes from the Senate and
arbitration
the Assembly,
between the lower and upper house,
was voted. So it's also a bit surprising that the 49.3 was used at this very moment, after we had long but discussions that took place in both chambers. So that's also a sort of surprising move that was made.
At the end of the day, there's a strong executive. And that's why the markets are really the real reason why the markets aren't panicking?
No. I mean, I don't think that the political uncertainty and the political tensions. I mean, you mentioned this Article 16. This Article 16. I'm not an expert of the French Constitution, but it was put in the Constitution to face situations like war, like that, not just a budget crisis. So the fact that if it really invokes this Article 16 that allows Macron, not even the Prime Minister, but Macron to govern without the Parliament, I think that would be a first and quite a spooky one. So no, I think I repeat that the reason why markets are not worried is, first of all, I repeat, because the public finance situation is less dire than it seems. And second, because let's not forget, France is part of Europe. In Europe, we have a central bank that is controlling somehow is compensating, at least in the short run, turbulences in the markets, which means not, once again, that you can do it forever, but that you can buy some time to sort out what is really important and then act. But I mean, the real problem, we just saw it now, the real problem is really that there is no, I don't see as an external observer, I don't see any possible
So
way to
each-
reach an agreement within this parliament. So at least we need to wait for
Well,
July.
let's show an
at least.
illustration of that impossibility. Just a reminder that between the 143 seats of the far right, the 178 of the new Popular Front, that's how the left-wing coalition calls itself, the opposition's got more than enough to get to 289 on Wednesday and bring down the government. And of course, everybody's got an eye till the next time when they can call snap elections, which will be in the summer. France 24's team has been throughout the country taking a look to see how one party in particular has been preparing for that eventuality. It's a documentary entitled France is Far Right at the Gates of Power. It's by Clovis Cazelli. Here's a tiny clip of it.
The National Rally has tightened its grip in recent years on the Alpes-Maritimes. Their opponents seem nowadays less vocal, possibly the sign of a sense of resignation. We're filming a report on the National Rally. What do you think of them?
Nothing, you can keep it.
The far right stands more than ever at the gates of power. In 2017, it had 8 MPs of the National Assembly. The figure has now jumped to 125. They can also count on the support of a breakaway group from Les Républicains party. In the last general election, Marine Le Pen struck an alliance with Éric Ciotti, who was then the leader of the mainstream Conservative Party. It led to the implosion of Les Républicains, and the move helped Ciotti get re-elected MP. It brought equal success to one of his right-hand men, Bartholomé Lenoir in the Creuse. This department in the centre of France is very rural and traditionally a left-wing bastion. Lenoir visits farmers who proudly show him their cattle. For the right-wing MP, one thing is clear. The far left and the Green Party represent a real threat.
Farmers in the Creuse are under attack from the Green Party and so-called environmentalists. These people, they say we should stop eating meat. What they don't realise is that these farmers are the essence of French identity. If that goes away, well, it's all over for our nation.
It's complicated with the ecologists because we can't accept some things they say.
I don't know what their vision is. They should come live with us for a week and then maybe they'd stop talking nonsense.
Rural France feels largely misunderstood and forgotten by politicians. The MP says he wants to give them a voice and that the alliance with the far right is the only path to victory.
Life is becoming worse and worse, and nothing changes. I believe there's a need for something radically different. We need right-wing unity to offer a real choice. The National Rally is not what it used to be. Those who say they're shocked by our alliance aren't really right-wing in my mind, because the National Rally is very respectable nowadays.
In June's European elections, the National Rally finished first in all but 15 of the 256 Creuse municipalities.
You can see it in full on our website, france24.com. Gérald Olivier, those farmers, they get a lot of EU subsidies, and yet they're tempted by a party that's Eurosceptic.
Yeah, well, there are differences in France in agriculture. Some do well. Most, as these people, little farmers who have dairy farms, do a lot worse. But they do depend on a lot of subsidies. But there was something quite interesting in what the person was saying, is that he said the National Rally is no longer the party that it used to be. And I quite agree with that. And I think politics, the media, should take that into account. What happened in the last parliamentary election is that the National Rally came in first at the first ballot, and instantly you had the union of everyone else to keep them from power.
The so-called Republican Front.
Yeah, so-called Republican Front. Therefore, denying people like that voter what they thought were their legitimate access to power. And until that point breaks, France will be in an unsolvable and ungovernable situation. It's easy for the left to make alliances. The current NFP didn't exist 3 weeks before the election. Now they claim to represent the number one party in parliament. You try to create a union of the right. Éric Zemmour tried. He went nowhere. And I think until the French media, the French voters realize that you have to deal with the National Rally as a legitimate party with legitimate claims and legitimate voters behind it, the country will never be governable again.
In the United States, the left is in therapy right now over its loss at North. One of the things they're accused of is talking down to the electorate. Is it the same in France, the way it's described there by Gérald Olivier, that the voters of the National Rally are not taken seriously enough?
I actually disagree with your views, because the National Rally is a party that, on the economic perspective, is very protectionist, is anti-European, is closer to some extreme left ideas, not the entire left, obviously, but their perspective of the economy is not close to the liberal right that you would have in the center bloc or in other parties. So having a union of those rights, so to speak, is something that doesn't make any sense. And what we did see during the snap election is that their ideology, the fact that they're opposed to binationals, that they have a racist basis and foundment, is still there. And we saw it in many candidates that came out with quotes that we all discussed because they were really shocking. So I think they are doing, and they're doing well, they're succeeding in this strategy of dédiabolisation, but nonetheless, when you look what's behind the front, you see the same ideas that made Jean-Marie Le Pen being accused of racism. You still have that. It's part of their DNA.
It is true that the National Rally still is trying to make foreigners the scapegoat for everything that does not go right in the country. They're very much controlled by a clan. It's literally a family that controls the party.
Like it or not, that's a majority view in France. The people think there are too many immigrants. It's what your polls suggest.
Sure, but that's also because that's the opinions that are fed to them. And I think we need to do more to show that immigration, and actually an economist to my left would probably agree with me, that immigration, especially for a country like France, which is not growing any younger, is actually great for the economy and for our demography. But you might...
There are studies that show that the overall effect of immigration is usually positive. I mean, the United States is an immigrant country. What I think should be taken into account by any party, so in this case I'm totally agnostic, is that it has also very strong distributional impact. Okay? So when you have flows of immigrants, be them regular or not, there are tensions on different parts of the economies that have different intensity. And so what you need to do to govern this phenomenon that has not been governed, be it the right with the closed border policies or be the left, the problem is that if you don't govern it, then those who actually lose from this redistribution are actually going to, in the end, vote for extremist parties. But, the fact that the majority of voters today is against immigration doesn't mean that the only option is to shut down immigration. I mean, there is the option of trying to integrate better foreigners and then try to reap these benefits.
It's been the argument of the left for decades to claim that immigration is a chance for France. It's been their slogan. And maybe from a strictly economic point of view, you can defend that idea. From a cultural point of view, from a social point of view, from the point of view of crime and safety in the country, I don't think you can. And the problem with agriculture, to go back to that report you had, that person feels forgotten. That person said, if you abandon rural France, then you abandon the French identity. And it's true that the French have always been very much connected to the land, as they call it, and to agriculture. But beyond that, you find people who feel they're no longer at home in their own country. They're no longer the priority of the government. We're discussing the budget, and that government would not even agree to canceling free healthcare for illegal immigrants. If you come to France and you cross the border illegally, you're entitled to free healthcare. Where else do you see this? Yes,
if
you
you
are.
have an urgency,
Yes, you are.
no,
Yes,
we have
you
to
are.
be precise because we're talking about aide médicale d'État,
Yeah,
which is not
I am,
free healthcare. It really isn't. It just means that if you're in a state of urgency, then you'll be taken care of. You're not going to be left in the door of the hospital, which I think is something that you shouldn't do.
And you wouldn't need that for that to be enforced.
But you
So I
would
disagree
agree
with
with
the way
me.
you
You would
present it.
agree with me that IME is not free healthcare. It doesn't
is free
allow
healthcare.
you.
And also, it is very much to the benefit of French citizens because 4 years ago we lived through a terrible epidemic. We definitely don't want this to happen again. So providing some basic health care to people who come to our country, whether legally or not, is actually a matter of public health for the French people themselves.
All right, polling by Le Monde newspaper last month points to what the French call a normalization of the far right, and whereas there were 70% of the French who perceived Le Pen's party as dangerous to democracy when the father, Jean-Marie, made the presidential runoff in a 2002 upset. Right now, that number has changed. Only 38% see the National Rally as a threat to democracy. How much of that, Francesco Saracino, is a kind of Giorgia Meloni effect from Italy, where she's in a coalition, she's become, she's governing, and she's pro-NATO, she is anti-immigrant, conservative on social values, but other than that, she seems to be doing fine business, getting the best possible out of the new European Commission lineup. So is there this kind of effect that, well,
That's quite...
it's in government in the Netherlands, it's in government in other places?
It's a very interesting and not very easy question. Okay, it is certainly true that in Italy, Meloni put a lot of water in her wine concerning Europe and economic policies. Okay, so the budgets that she voted were pretty much approved by the Commission. She's trying to be fiscally responsible, at least on paper. So that is totally true. And her, let's say, far-right features, we can see in other things, on social issues, on strongly regressive tax policy, and more importantly, even a little bit more immaterial, on a certain reduction of civil liberty. So there are a few laws that are being discussed about, for example, punishing journalists for publishing pieces that are. So there are. So I'm not saying it's. I mean, it's still a far-right party, but you are perfectly right on the economic issues and on the European issues. She has really softened her tone a lot. I mean, you said it's Italy. She's becoming one of the poster boys of the girls, in this case, of the European Commission. I'm not sure that the same would happen with Le Pen, because the Italian situation is, in terms of reliance on Europe, is much worse. Okay, so Italy could not afford, a new government in Italy in 2022 could not afford, for example, to lose the Next Generation EU funds, which is a lot of money. So she was forced somehow to be very much compromising with Europe, because we are depending on European funding for most of our public investment. And so in this sense, I'm not sure that we would have a similarly moderate Le Pen if she were to come to power in France.
But Boris Fournier, we saw, if you see the long version of that report, how the National Rally is getting its ducks in order for the next time there's an election. Is the same true of the left? Is the same true of...
Well, it
right
is.
now you're in a coalition, but is that coalition going to last all the way to snap elections next summer?
I don't know. I'm not going to lie. It's been rough. the Inbound France, LFI was mentioned before. It's been terribly tough to be in a coalition with Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's been saying a number of despicable things, and he's been a very tough partner to be in an alliance with. So I don't know that the alliance is gonna survive this a new election. We'll have to see. What I know is that throughout France, the Parti Socialiste is very much implanted in the country. We have thousands and thousands of people who are ready to run campaigns with the Green Party, also with the Communist Party. And I feel like we have a lot of policy options to offer for the next election, for sure.
Eleanor Carrois, what's the political landscape supposed to look like right now?
Well, you know, there's one thing. We have a landscape, a National Assembly that reflects the vote of people that think differently. And it's very divided. It is very difficult when you're sitting in it, but it does show what, you know, the diversity of views of the French people. So what I think we need to do, and we're learning the hard way, is to learn how to make compromises and to learn how to come up with projects and not with people. Stop focusing on who's, you know, presenting what.
Wasn't that the exact promise of the French president after the second round of legislative and presidential elections in 2022? He said, "I heard you. I know you. Effectively saying it was a close shave, and that he will work with people." He was then accused of not doing so.
It was worse than a close shave. It was already a hung parliament because the president did not have the majority. And it got to a point with the extremes being very polarized where he felt that he had to, you know, put everything back flat and start over. Well, we started over, and guess what? We still have a hung parliament. So we're going to have to learn, you know, how to deal with it, because there's no possibility to have other elections for the next month. And no matter how much on the far right they're just preparing themselves for the new battle, no matter how much at the left they're scared to, be away from the French unbound because they think they're going to lose their constituencies. Truth is, we need to work for the French people, and we need to do it now. So we'll have to find a way.
I've asked this question before, and we're still pondering it. Why did he call that snap election? And do you resent it personally?
I don't resent it personally because I don't think you have to take politics personally, but I do feel that he thought that it would be clear, that it would give clarity, and that clarity would mean some sort of stability, with a majority and an opposition. Truth is, we have a divided parliament, and this is what we have because this is what French people wanted. So now we have to deal with it, but dealing with it means, having a project, and we tried to do that over the summer, and we were turned down by the oppositions that wanted to stay in the opposition. I hope now the situation will make them go around and maybe be more reasonable.
Yeah, truth is, Emmanuel Macron is an egoistic poker player, and he won a number of times, but this time he lost, and we are suffering from this last bet that he took in last July, and essentially got us into a hung parliament, which is causing so much trouble right now.
The president hoping to stay above the fray. We could show images, for instance, from last Friday. Emmanuel Macron under the eaves of the newly rebuilt Notre Dame for a tour before this weekend's grand reopening. He's been doing, there you see him, quite a bit of ribbon cutting as presidents did in their more ceremonial role under previous constitutions. Right now he's just flown off for a state visit to Saudi Arabia. We heard Gérald Olivier wondering aloud whether or not he'd be forced to quit early before 2027. What would be the circumstances under which he would accept to give away the power he has, which, as we said earlier, is still quite significant?
That I don't know, and I can't say. But the moment we're living may not seem that dire, but without a budget, how do you keep government open? You said there is no chance of a French shutdown.
Roll over the previous years, I'm told.
So you keep the same thing going until comes July, and then you have new legislative election that probably will yield the same result as the previous one, and the crisis won't be solved. The problem, when did the problem actually begin? It began when Macron was re-elected in 2022, not because of his record, but by default, because the other person was Marine Le Pen. and nobody wanted her on the left and in the center, so they coalesced against her to have Macron be re-elected.
But isn't that every presidential election? You vote for someone in the first round and you hold your nose and vote against someone in the second.
Well, hopefully you also vote for someone that you believe in and whose project you actually believe in. And maybe people did that in 2017. I don't think they did in 2022. So Macron got re-elected. He was immediately disavowed by the parliamentary election where he failed to win a majority. 2 years later, he takes the first opportunity to dissolve the assembly, try again. A second time he's disavowed. I think it should take into account the lessons of those two failures and decide to just move on and offer the French a new chance.
Boris Jamais-Fournier, would that be good if Emmanuel Macron resigned and there was a presidential election tomorrow?
I mean, if that's an opportunity for us to think, and I guess we would agree around this table, to think about our governance, because this is truly a consequence of this Fifth Republic, this constitution, which gives so much power to the executive branch and which leaves very little leeway for Parliament to actually discuss and create public policy. I think this would be a great benefit for everybody. And we'll see, but it's his own decision, sadly.
I think the problem lies elsewhere because
It's not with the Constitution.
When you look at our history, our recent history, what Jacques Chirac had was the same. In 2002, he was elected by default, with a lot of people not liking him but voting against Le Pen. Dad at the time, father, and then he also, before that he dissolved the parliament and he had a majority against him. The problem today is not so much the figure of the president, is the incapacity for the opposition to form a coherent alternative majority. And I think that actually reflects the status of our country. We are a country with a lot of different views, different parties that are represented. And you hear parties that want to have a proportional vote, but it would lead to no different result. So today, I think the only option is to learn, again, probably the hard way, but to learn to make compromises. And that is something I apply to myself and I apply to every single politician today. We need to change our mindset, to change the way we do politics, because otherwise you can have any alternative, any other vote you're going to have similar results, and you're going to have to learn how to do differently anyways.
In 2002, what you said was true. However, I forget what the exact number was, but I believe that Jacques Chirac got elected with over 80% of the vote in the
82.
second ballot, 82. So you had a real national union against Jean-Marie Le Pen. The score that elected Macron in 2022 was almost half of that, a little bit above half of that, but a lot lower. And that you should also take into account.
What do the French, what do Europeans want, Francesco Saracino? When again, there was this concept when Macron came into power in 2017. You remember he promised a Jupiterian presidency because there was this feeling that his predecessors hadn't been strong leaders enough, and that he would be a strong leader. The French just want a strong leader, or as Eleanor was saying, do they instead perhaps want to try coalition politics in earnest?
Okay, to the risk of opening a Pandora box, I would say that the French want what most people in advanced economies want, advanced countries want, a better management of the globalization process that has created polarized societies. Before these polarized societies became politically polarized, they became socially and in terms of income distribution polarized. And so what we have today, we have dispossessed middle classes in most countries. And these dispossessed middle classes do not vote anymore for the parties of the past. That is the simple thing. So if we want the moderate left and the moderate right to recover some appeal with the electorate, they need to find answers to these questions. And of course, I mean, this has been my opinion.
Because back in 2017, when Macron kind of blew up the big tent center-left and center-right parties, there was this idea that, well, maybe those ideas are passé, and that now...
That was, in my opinion, now when I'm stepping a little bit outside my competencies as an economist, so I'll be very careful. But I mean,
they say economists are good at predicting the past. So go ahead.
No, I mean, that, to me, in 2017, I said that. So at the time, I said in real time, that was a huge mistake because I mean, the problem of the old parties of the past was not that you had left against right, is that they actually converged toward a sort of center in which you had no real distinction. What is the difference between Tony Blair and John Major in the United Kingdom in terms of economic policies? Very little, very little. What is the difference between Matteo Renzi in Italy and the Berlusconi governments in terms of economic policies? Very little. What was the difference between between Chirac and Hollande in terms of economic policies? Very little. That is the problem. And the economic policies, and here is the economist who speaks, in the end determine the distribution of income, the welfare of people, and their voting behavior. So I think what we need is that the right and the left, each of them with their own values and systems of thought, they find a way to answer to the needs of the people, which they didn't do in most advanced economies for the past 20 years.
Well, one person who definitely will not teach us about income inequalities is Charles Kushner, the newly appointed U.S. ambassador to France, who's a felon,
he was pardoned.
A Trump family member, a member of the Trump clan, and who I guess knows nothing about France, and who Macron will have to deal with after he's done with the budget. But I feel like
just very briefly, because we're out of time, what would you like to see? A technocratic? It's a straight answer. Technocratic government, or try to get political parties to coalesce?
Nothing is worse than technocratics. The people has to prevail, so compromise.
Eleanor Kawa, you agree?
I agree that we need compromise. But we need to start with the project and then the people. And that's where we failed last time.
All right, a couple of suggestions there to end this discussion. Thank you so much, Eleanor Kawa, and thank as well Gérald Olivier. I want to thank Francesco Saracino, Boris Jamais Fournier. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.